Angel Reese was supposed to be the face of Chicago's future, but suddenly something changed, and the message felt colder than anyone expected. But guess what? When a team stops talking about you the way they used to, the league hears it loud and clear. For months, Angel Reese was positioned as the emotional centerpiece of the Chicago Sky, a player whose intensity, confidence, and visibility were meant to anchor the franchise through a rebuilding era that demanded patience and belief. Her arrival brought national attention, viral moments, and non-stop conversation, and for a while, it seemed like Chicago had found not just a player, but a cultural figure capable of driving relevance beyond the standings. Yet as the season unfolded, something subtle but unmistakable began to shift, and the timing of that shift is what has fans reading between the lines. Chicago did not make a dramatic announcement. Instead, the shift came through decisions, language, and recognition, the kinds of things front offices use when they want to send a message without ever saying it directly. And hold on for what's coming, because those signals were not small. As the Sky navigated another uneven season, internal praise began gravitating toward players whose impact showed up quietly and consistently rather than loudly and publicly. Coaches emphasized fundamentals, reliability, and on-court efficiency in interviews, while Reese's name appeared less frequently in the context of leadership and direction. It was not that she disappeared from coverage, but the tone changed, and in professional sports, tone is everything. The moment that truly ignited speculation came when organizational recognition spotlighted other contributors as cornerstones of the team's progress. Fans immediately noticed the contrast. Where Reese once dominated headlines as the emotional engine of the roster, Chicago began celebrating production, availability, and consistency elsewhere. The reaction online was instant and polarized. Some viewed it as overdue honesty, others saw it as a quiet demotion. Either way, the message landed. Angel Reese did not respond with silence. Her public comments, social media activity, and interviews suggested frustration, ambition, and impatience with where the team stood competitively. She made it clear she expected more, not just from herself, but from the environment around her. That attitude played well with supporters who admire confidence, but it also raised eyebrows among critics who questioned whether her approach aligned with the reality of a rebuilding franchise. But guess what? Frustration alone does not cause a front office to shift direction. What truly fuels moments like this is alignment, or the lack of it. Chicago appeared increasingly focused on long-term structure, player development, and stability, while Reese's public posture leaned toward urgency and star-driven expectations. That disconnect is where things started to feel uncomfortable. Around the league, conversations picked up quietly. Executives, analysts, and media voices began framing Reese less as an untouchable foundation piece and more as a fascinating question mark. Her talent was never doubted, but questions about fit, efficiency, and long-term impact crept into the discourse. When that happens, the narrative changes whether a player likes it or not. Fans began comparing situations, and one comparison surfaced over and over again. Clark, not because Reese lacked visibility, but because Clark's transition into the WNBA followed a different arc entirely. Clark arrived, produced immediately, elevated teammates, and reshaped her franchise's identity without publicly challenging its structure. Indiana rallied around that clarity, and the league rewarded it with attention, attendance, and momentum. Chicago's situation felt messier, and Reese brought attention, but attention does not always translate into direction. Games were inconsistent, chemistry fluctuated, progress felt harder to measure. When organizations sense that gap, they start recalibrating priorities, sometimes faster than fans expect. Speculation intensified when trade chatter began circulating in fan spaces and media segments. No official reports confirmed that Chicago was shopping Reese, but the fact that the idea no longer felt absurd said everything. Star players who are viewed as irreplaceable rarely appear in hypothetical trade discussions so early in their careers. Reese's presence in those conversations signaled a shift in perception, not necessarily in action, but perception is often the first domino. Angel Reese's brand remains massive. Her endorsements, social presence, and cultural footprint are undeniable. Yet professional basketball has a brutal way of separating visibility from value. Teams ultimately build around what translates to wins, cohesion, and sustainability, not just headlines. Chicago's recent decisions suggest they are prioritizing the former, even if it costs them short-term buzz. Hold on, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. When a franchise stops centering its messaging around a player, it is rarely accidental. It means the organization is evaluating future paths, weighing flexibility, and considering scenarios fans are not meant to see yet. Reese may still be part of Chicago's plans, but the unquestioned status she once held appears gone. That realization has fueled the perception that Reese is being pushed out emotionally, if not contractually. Fans interpret silence as rejection. Critics call it accountability. Supporters argue she deserves better support. The truth likely lives somewhere in between, but the optics are impossible to ignore. The league thrives on contrasts, and the Reese-Clark dynamic continues to define this era, whether either player wants it to or not. Clark represents stability, structure, and immediate return on investment. Reese represents volatility, emotion, and unresolved potential. Neither is inherently wrong, but franchises choose which model they want to build around. Chicago's recent actions suggest they are choosing certainty over spectacle. That does not mean Reese has failed. It means the partnership may not be evolving in the same direction on both sides. And when that happens, separation becomes a matter of timing, not intention. What has quietly intensified this situation is the way league conversations increasingly place Angel Reese and Clark on opposite ends of the same measuring stick, whether either player asked for that comparison or not. Executives, analysts, and even sponsors are no longer asking who generates buzz. They are asking whose presence stabilizes a franchise, whose style translates cleanly into wins, and whose brand aligns with long-term organizational patience. That shift in questioning has reshaped how Reese is discussed behind the scenes. Clark's rise created an uncomfortable benchmark, not because Reese lacks talent or popularity, but because Clark's impact has been easier for decision makers to quantify. Attendance spikes, television numbers, and team cohesion followed her immediately, and that clarity matters to front offices operating under pressure to justify every move. Reese, meanwhile, exists in a more complex space where influence, emotion, and performance do not always move in sync, and that complexity has started to work against her in quiet ways. What fans rarely hear is how often teams value predictability over passion once the cameras turn off. Sources around the league have hinted that Reese's competitive fire, once seen as an asset, is now viewed as something that requires careful management rather than celebration. That perception does not mean she is unwanted. It means she is no longer universally easy to build around, and that distinction changes everything. But guess what? This is where the tension explodes. Reese knows these comparisons exist. She sees the praise Clark receives for leadership, and she understands what that signals about how franchises choose their faces. The frustration fans sense is not about one award or one season. It is about watching the league crown a model she is not being allowed to represent. And when a player realizes the league's favorite template no longer looks like them, the pressure to either adapt or exit becomes impossible to ignore. Angel Reese still commands attention, but Chicago appears to be moving forward without waiting for her narrative to catch up. The real question is not whether she leaves, but where she fits when the league stops bending around her.